Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Okay, everybody, it's Friday. This is the big one, both for this week and always. Friday shows, always the big shows under Trump. But for Kavanaugh, this is the one that we've been waiting for literally weeks now. We're going to be walking you through the procedural vote that happened earlier today. Some information about how the final vote within the next 24 hours could actually go down. We've got a lot of other news for you. We've got a couple of different midterm ads that are getting incredibly creative. I would say far more creative than they usually are. But on top of that, we have a couple of awesome guests. We're going to be joined by Sarah Smith, congressional candidate from Washington, who is actually going to a general election contest against another Democrat because of the way their state laws work. So that's going to be super exciting. And then we've got 3 protesters who were arrested while protesting the lack of information coming out from another death of an individual who was in police custody and then somehow just died. And very little information has actually come out. So they're going to be coming on to talk about the quest to get more information about that death and why they were arrested as well. Along the way, Brett Erlich is going to be joining us.
It's a real pleasure to be here, John. I'd
Good.
like to say for everyone who's looking very close on the telecast, I did drop something on my shirt. For those of you who listen to the podcast, my shirt is utterly clean. There's no stains on it at all.
You undercut that by saying it, though. This is often how a hardball will start, actually.
I was wondering if you'd make a comment about my comment. I held back my comment when you said the big one. I wanted to make a Kirstie Alley reference to the Emmys of the 90s when she was very drunk and said, I'd like to thank him for giving me the big one, but I didn't do that, John.
No, you just did.
That
was you doing it right there.
Yeah, you're right. In this office.
And you talked about the stain.
I would say in the office today, a lot of people have this vibe of what a crazy day of news it's going to be. So I think a lot of us are a little crazy ourselves.
Yeah,
and I'm glad that the Damage Report is here to bring it back, to ground us.
And at the same time, to talk about stains. Okay, so let's get into Kavanaugh because there's a lot to cover and we've so much news that we want to talk about other than that too. So look, if you're just tuning in, we have had the procedural vote, 51-49, his nomination vote will go forward. And it's expected that it seems like it's probably gonna happen tomorrow morning. Now, we're not going to have, a regularly scheduled damage report, obviously, but we will be doing a response video regardless, whether he gets voted, affirmatively or negatively. And we have a little bit of information about how that vote might actually go. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk a little bit about the lead up to today. So Donald Trump apparently getting more and more angry with this process, the way it's going down. He certainly expected this to be a much smoother process than it turned out to be. He's probably also a little bit mad about that viral video going around of him walking up to a plane with toilet paper on his shoe. There's a lot floating around in his head that's making him mad. So this morning he tweeted, "The very rude elevator screamers are paid professionals only looking to make senators look bad. Don't fall for it. Also, look at all the other professionally made identical signs paid for by Soros and others. These are not signs made in the basement from love."
First of all, the basement from love. That's the movie I want to see.
That's an indie film.
Oh, did you see The Basement from Love? It's only in landmark theaters.
Professionally made.
Yeah,
I don't know what that's supposed to mean. So here is what I believe has happened in 99% of all cases where there's some sort of protest. There's Soros and stuff. No, there's Soros.
No, it's Soros. It's only Soros. Are you kidding me, Donald Trump? There are so many signs at every one of your rallies that are like veterans for Trump that, I mean, if you want to talk about your basement from love, that's a thing. I don't know if there's a documentary called The War Room where they're like, can we have a bunch of people handwrite signs to make it look cool?
Yeah.
And that's a thing. But are you kidding me? These elevator screamers?
So those women are lying about having been sexually assaulted.
Yes, that's what he's trying to tell you. But anyone who watches that video, anyone who listens to what she says in the elevator confronting Jeff Flake, there is no way you can deny that. But that's the same dynamic that he's putting to work with the elevator screamers, as he calls her, and with Christine Blasey Ford's testimony, which if you listen to it, and after he listened to it, what they came away. It was incredible. But that's not what he's relying on. He's relying on now just going and saying a bunch of stuff to people who already agree with him to try to create a narrative that transcends that small group of people echoing each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the woman on the elevator was either honestly had been sexually assaulted or she was Meryl Streep.
But can we?
It's the best acting ever. I give her the Emmy or the Oscar or whatever. A Globe, perhaps, a golden one.
I just hate saying the word Soros.
Yeah, so I want to ask you about that. So I've seen a lot of people talking about why they go to Soros. Big question, is this just a shortcut to anti-Semitism?
I don't
There's
think
the Jew that is running things behind the scenes.
It's definitely, there is severe anti-Semitism behind that, but there's also a lot of love for Israel on the right. So
those often go hand in hand. The idea that we have to protect Israel, but we also think that there's a new world order.
Right,
but because they like Israel, they don't like Jewish people.
I know.
They think Israel is geopolitically and religiously important for them, not for Jewish people, but for the future of evangelical Christianity or for our battle against the Muslims.
Yes, they like Judeo-Christianity. They do not like Judeo. That's what it boils down to. Yeah, there's an inherent anti-Semitism. I feel like a weirdo saying it, that I have to say it, and saying it, period, is like, oh, it gives people an opportunity to be like, oh, it's always about that kind of stuff with you people, you know, on the left. But I think that's in there. I do also think that it's both a anti-Semitic undercurrent and just saying Soros is a thing you say when you're a crazy conspiracy theorist.
Especially when, like, okay, if he has been behind every left-wing protest for years now.
But he's not.
Show it. Like,
Where?
here's the thing, with the Koch brothers, like, we have had reporters show the actual transfers of money between Koch and their PACs to groups that organize protests. Like, we're not just saying, oh, the Koch brothers like this stuff. We're saying, here is the money they gave to Talking Points. Here's the money that they gave to blah, blah, blah. You go look at Ken Klippenstein's reporting. We actually show the money being moved around. With Soros, it's just, hey, you've heard of Soros. He's a scary, shady guy, right? And that's it.
Look at his profile picture. And I don't mean on his social media. They're talking about this.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about whether we might actually have Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. Because we had the cloture vote. We had, let's see, Joe Manchin, Susan Collins, Jeff Flake voted to advance Kavanaugh to a final vote, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to vote for him, although Flake has said, unless something changes, he will vote for him. And he also said he doesn't expect anything to change. So that's pretty clear. We'll return to Flake. Susan Collins is expected to give a big speech, I think in about 2 hours now. We should have a big speech where she will say how she's going to vote. Apparently believing that her voting to push forward the confirmation is not indication enough, which it really isn't. Let's see, and Joe Manchin has voted to move it forward, but he could just be doing that because he doesn't want to look like an obstructionist, even though he plans to vote against him. Maybe I'm just being hopeful and naive.
Joe Manchin's an interesting thing. On the actual vote on the floor today, he was not part of the original.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
and I don't know, this doesn't really mean anything. He was not part of the original ayes versus nays. It was after they all came in, they announced his after, as if he was like waiting. He might just not have been there. But it seemed even more cowardly. I do think that the way Joe Manchin operates in West Virginia, I think he could vote no and just say, I didn't like the look of this guy. Because that's the very Joe Manchin thing to say. It's like, they're going to tell me the Democrats or Republicans are all going to tell, or, you know, the party apparatuses, the politicians in Washington are going to tell me what to do. I just go with my gut. I didn't like the sound of this guy. He's not going to represent West Virginia. Give me another name, and I'll do the same thing I did last time and just evaluate him, size him up, and do it.
Yeah, it is possible. Look, I don't want to get your hopes up. And look, Ed Flake saying that he is going to vote yes on Kavanaugh. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. There's plenty of people you can watch if you want to be lied to. That does decrease the chance that he gets blocked from being on the Supreme Court. It just does. It doesn't mean that he's going to make it on. There are still scenarios there's like 3 scenarios where the votes work out so that he doesn't get on. But that does hurt it, and I'm not going to pretend that that's not the case. Now, I think we have to give credit to Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah.
We've been saying put pressure on them for week after week after week. And activist groups and regular people and celebrities. You know, we had Piper Perabo on, Alyssa Milano, trying to get people to put pressure on them. And it appears to have worked, at least in Lisa Murkowski's case. She says, I believe that Brett Kavanaugh is a good man. In my view, he's not the right man for the court at this time. I've been wrestling to really try to know what is fair and what is right. And the truth is that none of this has been fair. It hasn't been fair to the judge. But I also recognize that we need to have institutions that are viewed as fair. But if people who are victims, people who feel that there is no fairness in our system of government, particularly within our courts, we've gone down to a path that is not good and right for this country. So I don't like much of what she said there. And I also kind of don't like that the reason she's saying she's not going to go for him is because he makes it seem like the Supreme Court will be unfair. I think that's true. I don't know that that's the biggest issue with Brett Kavanaugh, but whatever. She is going to vote against Brett Kavanaugh. That is incredibly significant, especially with Jeff Flake voting the way he's going to.
Well, with the Roe versus Wade stuff, it seems like reliably anybody on that final list of names that Trump put forward will be bad for Roe. So in terms of these senators representing women's interests in a more moderate state, et cetera, it seems like they can confirm one of Trump's Supreme Court judges, and it will still be bad for them in the eyes of that. But with Kavanaugh, he adds an extra element of what we saw during that testimony. I think there's an argument for them to say, just like Manchin, give me another name. What does that say, though, for the midterms? Because previously in the general election, we had a bunch of Democrats, people on the left anyway, saying the Supreme Court is important. And there were a lot of folks saying, nah, not that important, not important enough to vote for Hillary. And on the right, there were a lot of people saying the Supreme Court's important. And they said it is important, and it's important enough for me to even vote for Trump so I get these judges. So if you do confirm Kavanaugh and you put him through, you're not really changing the effect of what the Supreme Court would say, except according to some having to do with whether he would say it's okay to subpoena a sitting president.
Which could be significant.
But you do have this specter of, are the Dems indefinitely obstructionist that will motivate people in the midterms on the right to come out and counteract the blue wave to a certain extent. That's the strategic thing. And it seems like when I was looking at the faces of Feinstein and Schumer today when they were giving their speeches before the floor, I just looked at them and I was like, it seems like they're kind of giving up.
Yeah, I mean, look, Feinstein has done some good stuff. Schumer has not been very important in this process. But again, Flake sucks. Let's bear that in mind for the rest of his career. He absolutely sucks. He's the worst. And by the way, you're not going to be president, you stupid, stupid little man. You're never, ever going to be president. Why would you want to be? Look at your party. Look at what it's become. And they don't like you. They're never going to like you. Doesn't matter if you support Kavanaugh, if you don't support Kavanaugh, at least just do the right thing on your way out because you're done after this. But anyway, no, he sucks. And Lisa Murkowski, pretty cool, at least on this. Terrible in general, but sometimes one vote is very significant. John McCain reminded us of that last year. Okay, we do have to take a break. When we come back, Sarah Smith, Democratic Congressional Candidate, Democratic Socialist as well, will be joining us on the show. We're going to be talking about her race, and maybe we'll touch on the Kavanaugh stuff as well after this. Okay, for the past few months, we've been talking about some of the big trends in the primary contests that have been going on this year, at the very least on the Democratic side. And right now, we're going to be joined by a candidate who represents at least a couple of those really awesome trends. This is Sarah Smith, a candidate in Washington's 9th District. Sarah, welcome to the Damage Report.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're very excited to have you here. So, look, I want to talk about the specifics of your race, especially because sort of structurally they're different than most general election races. But before we get into that, we've had a lot of first-time candidates in this cycle. You are one of those first-time candidates. So what is it that made you want to get involved in elected politics in this cycle?
So there's a lot of things that made me want to get involved. I think I kind of had that same visceral reaction that a lot of people in my generation had after the 2016 presidential election. And I just kind of decided I needed to do something. And I couldn't just sit around and wait for someone else to take charge and do something for me. I had to do it myself. And when I discovered a couple of groups like Justice Democrats and Brand New Congress, I was really excited. I was really amped about it. I was ready to go and find people to help get involved and see what I could do and how I could do my part. And then I got a call that they had a nomination come in for me. And I kind of talked it through, and I was trying to figure out whether or not I wanted to do it. And then I had a conversation with somebody about it. It sounds so hokey, but it really happened, where he said, if the ballot were to come today, would you vote for Adam Smith, the incumbent? And I told him, well, it would depend who else is on the ballot. And he's like, okay, then you need to be who else is on the ballot. And he was right. We've had enough dynastic politics. We've had enough of these lawyers, enough of these CEOs, enough of people that don't understand what life is like for regular working people and don't understand what legislation means to people like me and people who are working hard just to get ahead, people that are constantly held back by a system that forces them in that direction. And we need somebody who speaks our language and understands our voice in Congress to fight for us.
And we've certainly had a lot of politicians who've been in office for a very long time, as he has. I think he's a 9 or 10 term incumbent. So
11 term.
Whew, okay, yes. Wow. So he's been there for quite a while. One other question, though, about your background. So before you decided to run, what have you been involved in? What have you been up to? Like, what has prepared you to run, to beat this incumbent, to take over, to hold that position?
Sure, a lot. So I have been volunteering with a number of organizations for a long time. The Indian Society of Southern Arizona, Iskashita Refugee Network. I volunteered with the Seattle Humane Society, with King 5 Harvest Drive, with Ignite, with Chick-Tech's Act W conference. But there's more to it than just volunteer work too. And I think people discredit their working experience a lot. So I actually helped do mortgage foreclosure prevention during the height of the recession. And I helped do personal bankruptcy during the right after the recession hit, and then everyone was trying to scramble to get their finances together. I actually did a lot of bankruptcy for folks that were going through that. And then I was a liability and claims negotiator for an insurance company for about 6 years. And I spent some time managing a mechanic garage. And now I actually work doing tax law research. And a lot of that doesn't seem like it would equip you for something like Congress. But my entire working life has been negotiating with people, has been helping people who need a leg up, has been trying to find solutions for people that are struggling. It's been focused on out-of-the-box thinking. It's been focused on dealing with those same attorneys that I'm going to be talking to in Congress and understanding how to negotiate with them and how to get them to see things from my side. So a lot of my working experience has prepared me really well. It's also given me a monumentously thick skin. And just for a really nerdy segue, I used to be a guild leader in World of Warcraft and Rift. And you can imagine being a main tank female on the internet during the time when we were less self-aware socially has given me a lot of strength.
Well, I like you even more because I was a main tank as well. So not a guild leader or anything like that, but I did play for a bit. Okay, well, we could just start talking about MMOs, but I'm going to resist the urge. So your race is a little bit different in that this is one of the states that has a top 2 system where it's not a party thing where it's going to be a Democrat versus a Republican. It's whoever does the best in the primary. So you are going against a Democrat, and you do have a number of different things that differentiate you from him. One of those, though, is one of the big storylines of this election cycle, which is democratic socialism. And the right has really been trying to fearmonger around this term and either what it represents or what they want people to think it represents. While at the same time, some candidates like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have just skyrocketed to prominence and popularity while embracing this label. So what do you think about that battle that's going on right now in America?
I think a lot of it stems from fear mongering. So the right fearmongers a lot with socialism. And I mean, we've seen it with Alex a lot where they put her platform up there and they're like, this is what democratic socialists want. And people take pause and they're like, well, yeah, I want that too, kind of. And kind of getting out there into these communities. We've actually sat down and met with some GOP members, quite a few actually. And all we do is we kind of talk them through the pragmatism that goes along with democratic socialism. We talk to them about how this actually is something that will benefit them. One of the things that's really important to a lot of folks on the right is self-determination, right? They talk about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And we've made a conscious effort on this campaign to get people to redefine what that means. Like one of the conversations we had recently with somebody who's a very far right guy called the campaign line the night before ballots dropped, yelling at us about how he hates that his son wants to vote for me. And he's like, talk to me about your platform. Like, what is this? This is terrible. And we just kind of talked him through it. We're like, look, if your son got sick and he needed a kidney transplant, you would do everything possible. You'd sell your house, you do whatever you could to make sure that he survived, right? And the guy said, yeah, absolutely I would. And we just asked him, did you really make a choice to help him in that moment? Was it really a decision that you actually made? You could have chosen not to help him. Is that really a choice?
Yeah.
And the guy was kind of like, you know what? It wasn't. And we're like, what we're doing is democratic socialism is taking away that sense of false choice where we have to pretend that we need to decide between our kid dying or going into medical bankruptcy. That's not a real choice. Yeah. The only time we have a real choice is when all of our basic needs are being met. Like we don't actually have to worry about going into medical bankruptcy, when we can decide the education we want because it's not going to drown us in debt, when we can decide how we're going to get from one side of the coast to the other because we have an option in our infrastructure. That's when we have real choice and real agency and the real ability to self-determine. And when you couch it in those terms to people and you talk about it in practical terms and just show them that these are not real choices, where democratic socialists are fighting for real choice and real autonomy. That's what we're doing. That usually resonates with a lot of people on both sides.
Yeah. I'm imagining it's resonating with our viewers right now. So I do want to ask you one other question, though, because I saw that you were tweeting about this right before we went live with the show today, and that has to do with Brett Kavanaugh. His process has gone forward. The vote was successful. He will have a vote to potentially get on the Supreme Court this weekend. There are still some senators that appear possibly undecided. As you're watching this go forward, as you've been watching it over the past few weeks, what are your thoughts about the stakes here and what it represents?
So I actually am a sexual assault survivor. This is something that is incredibly visceral to watch for me. And I've seen some friends of mine who I still somehow have retained some conservative Facebook friends, but I've watched them talk about not believing Christine Blasey Ford. And the thing that I try to tell people is whether or not you do, his conduct alone should absolutely disqualify him from this position. Absolutely. Instead of answering questions truthfully and honestly, he chose to scream and start crying on the podium and point fingers at female senators that were interviewing him. His conduct alone doesn't make me confident that he's going to be any kind of beneficial justice in any court. And quite frankly, a person that reacts that way when they're being confronted with something like that is not somebody I want on the Supreme Court. Yeah. And part of the problem for me too, and what's really most visceral is this is not the face of a guy who regrets doing something. This is not the face of a guy who has it under control. This is the face of a man who has gone his whole life where nobody ever challenges him. This is a guy where he just expects to walk into a room and get exactly what he wants and never face a challenge. This is the face and the action of a man who is entitled to this position and who demands to be given this position he's entitled to. I think it's important for the Senate to not confirm him, surely to send a message that nobody is entitled to any position. They are elected to that position and appointed to that position, but they're not entitled to it. And for women like me who are having to relive this trauma of sexual assault over and over again, just watching him grates on my nerves and feeling how helpless all this voice sounds in this whole process. We feel helpless. We feel like our experiences don't matter. We feel like what happens to us doesn't matter. Like no matter how many times we call, it doesn't matter. But this is why I keep telling people lived experience in Congress and the Senate is so important, because when you have people that have experienced the world, who've experienced poverty, who've experienced sexual assault, who've experienced student debt, who've experienced struggle, when you have people like that going and legislating and representing folks, they're the ones who are going to say, if it were me, and if I were Christine, I would be devastated. And I know because I've been in her shoes and I can't vote yes in good conscience. Yeah. No senator with a conscience should be voting yay on this.
Yeah. Well, Sarah Smith, candidate in Washington's 9th District, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break. We come back, couple midterm ads, other races that are heating up thanks to some very creative, although perhaps in some cases deceptive advertising after this. Welcome back, everyone. Look, we got a couple of ads we're going to break down. I just want to briefly say that Brett Kavanaugh put out an op-ed that was initially pitched as sort of apologizing for his outbursts, but I don't think that that's at all what it was. So what did you think about that op-ed that he put out? He said he was emotional, but he did not apologize for it.
So here's what I think about those op-eds. The op-ed, yeah, it seems like he's trying to convince you that he got emotional about stuff, but the time he was most emotional was in reading his opening statement, which was prepared, and not just prepared. He told everyone that he wrote it himself. Yeah. I wrote this myself. I showed it to no one. So left to his own devices, which I don't believe, but like left to his own devices, he came up with this. And that's the process that we will entrust him with if he becomes a Supreme Court justice, is to talk to some people, go away by himself and write his own little opinion.
Yeah. Is he going to be crying while doing that?
I hope so.
He cried during the calendar part. Anyway, so that was a whole weird thing. I guess now, look, we're kind of past that in the news. At least we're past the vote. We're wondering what's going to happen with Manchin and with Collins. So I guess the op-ed maybe doesn't matter that much. What matters right now is the pressure that you, as a regular person, especially their constituents, can put on them by calling the phone number that we've had at the bottom of the show throughout. Okay, let's jump now to those ads. First, I want to talk about Richard Ojeda. Ojeda, right? Ojeda. Richard Ojeda is running in West Virginia's 3rd District against the Republican candidate Carol Miller. And Ojeda has been very successful in getting a lot of really interesting coverage because he doesn't look like your standard, I was going to say Democratic candidate. No, he doesn't look like your standard candidate at all. He's an aggressive guy. He's a big guy.
He looks like your standard doomsday prepper.
Doomsday prepper, yes. But really good guy, good on the issues.
Yeah.
Formerly had supported Trump at one point, but now is like, he's a good candidate. And she has a particular way of advertising against him that is going to attempt to turn his positives into a negative. Let's watch the ad and see if she succeeds.
They're stone cold in the ring, then they're stone cold left wing, like radical Richard Ojeda, slamming President Trump with hateful personal attacks.
Put your cell phone down, kick your kids out of the Oval Office, be a president.
That person is stone cold crazy.
I will definitely be seeing you in November.
You can't have that person in Congress.
That's why Trump's in Carol Miller's corner.
A woman that works very hard for you. Everybody in West Virginia loves Carol Miller.
I'm Carol Miller, and I approve this message.
These ads. So, okay, so first let's focus on the part about him. Vicious personal ads. Put your phone down. Oh my God, that's vicious.
It's
vicious
amazing.
Ad.
It makes him look awesome.
Yeah, I think, especially when it's like, it's okay, we can't have a person who's not, abiding by the normal rules of decorum and all that. Instead, he should be like Trump. What are you talking about?
It's so weird.
I think this is an ad for him.
It sounds fantastic. And it's just, you have to know, everyone, that when Trump comes to your town for a rally, the way in which he endorses this candidate is he knows the rest of his speech through and through. He knows exactly the kind of stuff he's going to talk about. I'm so good at this. I'm so good at that. The Democrats are stupid. The Republicans are smart. And I wholeheartedly endorse, look down at notes, Carol Miller back out to the crowd for Congress.
What that clip of him saying, everybody in West Virginia loves her. Carol Miller works really hard for you. Did it not sound like someone went and took a bunch of videotapes and cut out the individual words and put them together?
Carol Miller is the best person, and that's why I don't like Richard Ojeda.
I don't think it's a very good ad. I will also say this: if you want to learn more about Carol Miller, then Donald Trump can provide information for you since he doesn't know anything about her. I went to her Twitter page.
Please do.
And this is the front of her Twitter page.
Big check mark.
That really
endorsed by Trump for those listening.
That's the only qualification that she's listing there. The only thing you need to know, endorsed by Trump. Well, yeah, she is the Republican candidate. I guess she would be.
This is how it plays out. It's all so much of the process is cut and paste. It's interesting to see people who kind of improvise their own approach around the margins, which is exactly what Richard Ojeda is doing.
Exactly.
Everyone else, I mean, even literally, when you say that there are ads in which or at least things in which you cut out the names of politicians and put in other names over and over again. That literally exists. And every election cycle, someone does like this groundbreaking report on how like the DCCC and the RNC make these ads and just the same voiceover, the same imagery. This one's different because it seems to be catered for stone cold Richard Ojeda, who, by the way, sounds amazing.
He should start going by that. Yeah. That's awesome. What are you doing, Carol Miller? Do you not understand this at all?
But it's not dissimilar to the way that you see Joe Manchin shoot stuff in his ads. He pulls out a gun. He's like, I don't care what they're saying about me. I love guns. Ojeda's like, I'm going to bop you one in these midterms.
That's not what wrestlers say.
That's what my dad used to
bop
say.
You one?
I'm bop you one.
Okay, we have a second ad. Let's turn now to Ohio's 4th district where we have, hey, Jim Jordan. Remember him when he had a scandal before we all forgot about it? Where he knew about like tons of kids being sexually molested? No? He's just gonna stay? Okay, well, we're stuck with him. Unless Janet Garrett can actually take him down. So she has a really interesting ad. Try to see if you can tell which TV show she's channeling in this ad about Jim Jordan.
Talking about abuse. No one ever reported any abuse to me. If they had, I would have dealt with it. And what bothers me the most?
Dear Jim Jordan, you were so smart. You knew how it would happen. Not because we don't care, but because we were complacent. Because we were not paying attention. Your beliefs about women were crystal clear. Violence against women? Acceptable. Equal pay? Unnecessary. Birth control and choice? Eliminated. Complete dominion over female minds and bodies was the goal. A male-dominated government and court system was the tool. And we let you do it, didn't we, Commander Jordan? You got away with it because when it mattered most, when we had the chance to raise our voice, we fell silent.
Yes, okay, that was I mean, look, I love Game of Thrones, so I love that ad. Kidding.
That's not Game of Thrones. For those of you who are listening to the podcast, she called him Commander Jordan, and that is also she wore the frock most associated with
and the white,
the Desperate Housewives tale,
the Desperate Handmaids, yeah,
Desperate Handmaids,
which you have previously worn on this show. But yeah, so look, there's been a lot of imagery of the handmaids throughout this election cycle. That was the most direct, I think. What I like though is that she didn't just point out sort of his general stances or philosophy. She does list all those votes at the end to provide some good evidence to what she's saying. I mean, look, I'm sure he would say, I don't actually want women to be sexual slaves to produce children for commanders. Okay, fine. But he does have all those votes.
But when people report to me that wrestlers were used as sexual slaves for the coaches at Ohio State, at the Ohio State University, I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, so look, that's a great ad. She's previously run against him. He is in a very red district. It's considered very safe. She needs to throw a Hail Mary, I guess. And this is something that could get a lot of attention, but it is going to be an uphill battle one way or another. I do want to just reiterate what I was saying earlier, though. Jim Jordan still, like all of that stuff, all of our concerns from before are still true. He still knew about those assaults. Remember all those students who came out and said, yeah, he definitely knew about it. He would laugh about it. We were talking about it in front of him and nothing happened. It's crazy what we will simply move on from if something bigger and shinier happens. In any event, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we've got a trio of activists who've been arrested while protesting, trying to find out more about an unnecessary death in police custody after this. So all too often when the police are involved in a death, we are lucky to even find out the basic facts of it. And justice is certainly not the expectation. We've got a pretty amazing case of that here with the death of Earl Lamont McNeil. And we're now joined by 3 activists arrested while trying to find out more about what happened in the San Diego area earlier this year. Mark Lane, Aeramique Glass, and Shane Parmely join us on the Damage Report now.
Hi. How you doing?
Welcome to the show. Doing well, but very interested in finding out more about this. So you were all arrested recently. There has been activism around trying to find out more about what actually happened to Earl. For those who might not be familiar with this case, can you give a basic idea of what we do know at this point?
So what we do know is that about a week and a half ago,
we finally, after 4 months of protesting and the activism work of this community, we sat with the DA's office along with the family, and we were able to finally watch the video footage that we have been asking for and demanding. In that video footage, you see Earl McNeil yelling out for help, crying out for help, saying he can't breathe throughout the ride. In the back of the police car, you see the takedown. You see him calling out for help multiple times. You see officers laughing at him, neglecting to help him when he cried out for help. And then ultimately, you can read the medical examiner's report where it says homicide on the report. Even after all of that, the DA's office is refusing to prosecute the officers involved in Earl McNeil's death.
So I had read a little bit of the details about that, the autopsy, saying that they believe that it might have been lack of oxygen that led to his death. But they also talked about multiple injuries that he appeared to have that he hadn't had before going in to the police department. So in the video that you saw, is there any indication of who actually gave him these injuries?
Well, the injuries, you can't tell in the video where the injuries come from. But we have pictures from when he was in the hospital that show the bruising all over his head and the mouth injuries, arm injuries. What you can see is that he was put in a device called the wrap, which is a full body restraint, and he was kept in that for over 2 hours, which is against the company's policy. You're also not supposed to use it with suspected drug use. They also put a spit hood and a spit rag over his head and covered his mouth. And that was on for over 2 hours as well. And then when he got to the central jail, because they didn't take him to the hospital first and they didn't call paramedics. After 2 hours, they took him finally to the jail. One of the deputies at the jail, when they were pulling him out of the car, pulled his T-shirt up over his mouth as well. So he had 3 barriers over his mouth and nose. Basically, it was a reverse waterboarding is what happened to him. So all that you can see, and all that's listed in the ME's report as well. Excuse me, as a contributing factor to his death.
And so at this point, so you've spoken with them now. From the point of view of the police, are they effectively saying that's what happened, we're done with this, that's the end, there's going to be no further investigation, no charges, no nothing?
Well, there are charges, but they're against us 3. There's no charges against any police officers, but all 3 of us have been charged with resisting arrest. The 2 white people you look at have been charged with 1 charge of resisting arrest. The young African-American lady, Mika, has been charged with 5, which is typical in the disparity of how we charge people in this country as well.
So can you tell us about how those charges came about? What sort of protests you were involved in?
Well, there was a city council meeting that they shut down several times and pushed everybody out into the lobby. And there were some things that happened there that eventually led to the 3 of us being arrested the same night. And I don't think we're supposed to get into totally all the details.
Well, I can kind of talk about my case. So basically, we had been protesting for months at the National City Council meetings. On this particular day, I arrived where they were targeting men of color. Just the position and how I move in the community is always protecting our men because I know they are targets. I then was trying to get in between an officer and a young man, and that officer began to push me with his body, chest bump me, and then I already had previously an injured ankle that they knew about. By him pushing me, I hit the ground. And so from there, they carried me out, and then
very roughly rolled her over, slapped handcuffs on her, and carried her off like a sack of potatoes.
And it's all in the videotapes. And I'm just grateful that Shane and Mark were there to watch and protect as much as they could.
Yeah, it's amazing that what you're protesting is effectively police brutality. and
Yeah,
the
which
response
is
from
what
them.
they affected on us.
They're very good at messaging, apparently.
Yeah, we had about 3 months of protesting at city council meetings because National City PD and National City Council are effectively doing nothing about it. There's been 11 arrests throughout those protests. There's been 6 arrestees injured as we protest police brutality peacefully. So that kind of tells you where their mentality is. And everybody else's charges were dismissed. Ours were not. We went to arraignments this week, and then we'll be going to a jury trial in November.
Well, hopefully your charges will also be dismissed. It seems to be the trend to just take out the protesters. They don't want to actually answer questions. If they throw you in the back of a van, it's a little bit easier to avoid them, I guess. But thank you for continuing to push for the truth and finding out what's happened here. I have one more question for you, though. That video that you were able to see, is there any chance that that's going to be made available to the public? Will other people be able to find out more about what happened?
Yeah, the video was released a week and a half ago after the family was finally allowed to view it. But it's 2 hours and 20 minutes of video. They blurred out 1 hour and 14 minutes. I worked for the lawyer that's representing the family as well. We're trying to get access to that 1 hour and 14 minutes as well. And the medical examiner's report that was released to the public was also heavily redacted, which it shouldn't have been. So we're trying to get access to the unredacted medical examiner's report as well. So if you want, I can send you guys a link to the videos that were released, where it's basically 2 hours of Earl McNeil pleading for help, and them ignoring him and ridiculing him until he finally died right in front of them.
Wow, that would be great. Thank you. To whatever extent we can try to help to put more pressure on them to eventually find out what actually happened to Earl, we would love to be able to be involved in that. So Mark, Aeramique, and Shane, thank you for your activism and also for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We're going to take one more short break. When we come back, a look back at the week that was. Okay, that was a rough one. And now it's time to find out what this week did to you in a segment we call This Week I Learned. So you guys tweeted at us. Let's see what you said. The cake is a lie says Trump ordering a sham investigation and Rosenstein and Wray complying also has the effect of undermining the Mueller investigation since it damages the credibility of the FBI as a whole. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that much. Obviously, Republicans have bottomed out on respect for the FBI. It'll go up immediately after Trump is gone. But for now, they hate it. Do you think Dems don't like the FBI now?
I think in this situation, you could probably just pin it on the executive branch not giving them the kind of freedom that they want, which is an argument for people like Rosenstein to keep around.
Yeah, I feel like it was an overly controlled investigation is how I would put it. But thank you for your concern. Paul G. for all says FBI didn't even take the whole week. Unfortunately, in this case, FBI had to take their marching orders from Trump White House. Trump wishes he could do the same for the Mueller probe. So Paul seems to sort of agree with us, at least a little bit.
Way to go, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
We need more
screw
Pauls.
you, the cake. No, I'm kidding. Rainy Scribbles said something, and there were actually quite a few like this. I wish that we could read more, but Rainy Scribbles says, I learned that Trump and supporters will laugh at a sexual assault victim and have no regrets about it. You could chart how emboldened they are to directly attack sexual assault survivors day by day, and it's like exponential. Yeah. And now it's just they're paid off by some billionaire Jewish person. That's why they're lying about being sexually assaulted.
Yeah. It's a 48-hour rule.
Yeah, I pointed at you then. You're not the person.
I'm a Jewish.
Just to be clear, you're not a billionaire.
I am a Jewish.
Though. You're not a billionaire. Okay. And Jillian C. says that good victims stay quiet. Please read that with sarcasm.
So go give a line read.
That good victims stay silent. Is that sarcasm? Quiet. But yeah, that was unfortunately the message that they have been sending out. I hope, though, that for the many, many people who have been watching this and have had an even rougher experience because they themselves have been the victim of sexual assault, attempted sexual assault, violence of any kind, we'll see that that is what the Republicans are saying. That's what the GOP and their supporters are saying. But that is not the actual lesson, that there are so many people out there supporting you, standing against Kavanaugh, wanting to fundamentally change society so that it is not as unjust as it has always been towards people with similar experiences. So thank you for watching this week. Thank you, Brett, for joining us on today's show. Lots of fun, except for all the terrible stuff. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already rated the podcast, go on iTunes, give us a 5-star rating and review, please. That would be awesome.
Watch Happy Half Hour.
Watch Happy Half Hour as well later on today, and we will see you next Monday. Thank you for listening to the Damage Report podcast, the show covering the true threats facing our country and what you can actually do about them. You can support this free podcast by leaving us a review and giving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you happen to be listening to it. Every review helps more people discover the show at no cost to you. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.